Throughout this COVID pandemic, there has been a lot of craziness that none of us would have expected. And throughout all the bad, the UFC saw some breakout stars in basically every single one of their divisions and seemingly pumped out more shows at that time than their normal schedule. And with that, the welterweight prospects have seemingly gone through the roof, with top 15 challengers around every corner that are going to make exciting superstars in the future. First, the likes of Khamzat Chimaev, who bludgeoned both the 185er and 170er in the UFC, on way to comparisons to Khabib already. This guy is a monster, and he's on in a very impressive run. In addition to Khamzat Chimaev, we saw the fighter that's going to be featured in today's video, Sean Brady, that has put on some amazing UFC performances since being introduced, and he's 5-0, 15-0 overall, and has a huge opportunity to make a big wave in his next UFC contest and his overall UFC career. He's going to be in the title picture very, very soon, if not already in the title picture. But let's take a look in this episode of Career Retrospective how he's gotten where he's gotten. In Sean Brady's 5 UFC contests against relatively strong opponents, he averages 3.91 significant strikes per minute and a whopping 14 takedowns in just 5 fights, combining great wrestling with a significant and powerful striking game. Brady's looked at fighting the same way throughout his entire career. He's never looked at padding his record with easy fights, and since turning pro, even at 0-0 and 1-0, Brady has never taken on an opponent that's sub 500. This has put Brady on the fast track to regional titles throughout his early career, where he'd signed with Cage Fury Fighting Championship immediately out of the gate. He'd fight on the 38th event in his pro debut, stopping his opponent in the very first round, and after 5 straight wins, 2 years into his pro MMA career, he got a title shot at welterweight for the CFFC. That's a big moment for a fighter that's 2-0 no matter what organization you're in. I don't know how many WWE fans follow this channel or are watching this video, but he'd fight Tanner Saraceno, who competed on a WWE reality TV show called Tough Enough, but nonetheless, Sean Brady would land a mounted single-arm guillotine that forced the Tough Enough alumni to submit in the very first round, and this would be Brady's first taste of gold in the main event of CFFC 65. He'd defend the title 2 more times in Cage Fury Fighting Championship, and amidst the defenses, he'd also take a fight in the main event of LFA 49. In the LFA's trip to New Jersey and taking place in the Golden Nugget Hotel and Casino in Atlantic City, the now 8-0 Sean Brady would take the trip just an hour away to take on Gilbert Urbina. The LFA would not match Brady up with any inexperienced fighters, Gilbert Urbina being a very, very touted and successful mixed martial artist in his own run, who in the future we would see on The Ultimate Fighter, this most recent season of The Ultimate Fighter, and in his own right has trained with the likes of John Jones at Jackson Wink, Carlos Diego Ferreira, and all the great mixed martial artists at that gym, with 2 brothers who are also MMA fighters, Hector Urbina fighting in UFC pay-per-views, and Elias Urbina, who has fought on The Ultimate Fighter and sits at 5-1 as a pro. This fight, however, like all else of Brady's, was not going to be an easy run-of-the-mill win that would launch him into the UFC. Brady would give up a 4-inch height advantage and a 1.5-inch reach advantage, but would still dominate the fight in every aspect of it. He'd go on to win all 3 rounds and call out the LFA welterweight champion all in the exact same night. This call-out wouldn't come to fruition as Brady had bigger opportunities over the horizon. He'd get the successful last CFFC title defense in February of 2019 and was announced as signed to the UFC not more than a month later in March. And for this first fight, Brady would not cut corners. He'd take on 16-fight UFC veteran Court McGee in what was his UFC debut, and has fights against contenders such as Santiago Ponzinibbio and former world champion Robert Whittaker. So Court McGee is not an easy fight for somebody to walk into the UFC cage staring across from. Brady would win this fight as a unanimous decision, with 2 judges scoring each round for Brady. And then in his next UFC adventure, he'd take on a prospect of 22 pro fights with a record of 19 wins and 3 losses, which would pit prospect versus prospect. Ismail Nordiev had 6 finishes in his 7 fights before signing to the UFC, where he'd win 2 unanimous decisions in the UFC with a loss to Chance Recountree, before meeting Brady on the prelims of Figueiredo vs. Benavidez. Nardiev would come in as the favorite on the night, but Brady would again pick up a 10-8 third round en route to the unanimous decision, having a decisive edge on all of the judges' scorecards. This leads us into the UFC pandemic era, where Brady didn't have a fight for 6 months. And after those 6 months, he decided to come out with a blaze on the Rakic versus Smith undercard and delivered his first UFC finish in what was a brutal submission that put Christian Aguilera to sleep. Then, on his debut to UFC pay-per-views, he'd take on Jake Matthews on the prelims of UFC 259. Early stand-up was evenly matched, was not so much when the fight hit the mat. At that moment, Sean Brady was 14-0 after dominating Jake Matthews on the ground before securing a third-round submission at UFC 259. With this huge win on a mainstay pay-per-view, Brady would enter the welterweight top 15 and set himself up for an extremely important spot in the co-headliner of a fight night at the UFC Apex. He'd be scheduled to face off against the number 6, super dangerous, super intense Michael Chiesa, and who has some of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in not only the entire welterweight division, but in the UFC in general. And this on paper would be an important factor that Sean Brady would have to overcome if he wanted to get inside the top 10 and keep his flawless MMA record. On the night, Brady was forced to dig extremely deep. The first minute saw Brady get hit with 2 eye pokes, but Brady utilized his wrestling to immediately follow that up with a takedown and control the fight for a big part of the round, where Chiesa had no time to make that back. Entering the second round, it started with some impressive striking from Chiesa, but again, Brady took the fight to the ground and held control of a back mount until the end of the round. And at this point, Brady was up 2-0 on all 3 judges' scorecards, and Chiesa would need a Hail Mary finish in the third round. And he almost did it, to be honest. Landing his most significant moments while Brady hung on to a limited gas tank that he had left. Digging deep after being hurt, Brady would fight on instincts and land a takedown. And although it didn't lead to anything, and Chiesa would return to his feet and continue to hurt Brady until the final bell was sounded, this burst would not be enough to make back the points for Chiesa that he lost in the first 2 rounds. Brady would win the fight via unanimous decision and move up 6 spots into the top 10, sitting at number 8 after the fight. He now sits at number 9 after a couple welterweight shakeups. Brady is a legit top 10 welterweight contender who's going to be looking at the top of that division for his next fight, putting another huge feather in Brady's cap. Since that fight, he actually landed a massive upset in the jiu-jitsu world, getting a judge's decisions over one of the world's best, Craig Jones. Even while Craig Jones could not use his heel hook, that's his biggest weapon in Craig Jones's favor. So Craig Jones probably would have submitted him under normal circumstances. But because Brady's a UFC fighter, those are banned against him because he has fights coming up. But again, to defeat Craig Jones in and itself is a huge accomplishment in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world, and just another again, feather in Sean Brady's cap. As for now, we're going to wait and see what the UFC plans to do with the undefeated and dominant welterweight prospect that's handled the toughest fights, the toughest situations in the UFC and his pro career entirely. And we're going to get to see a very, very interesting career play out. But that's going to wrap up this episode of Career Retrospective. I want you guys in that comment section to let me know, how far do you think Sean Brady can go? Top 3, world champion. Where do you think he could end up? And what do you want to see? Who do you want to see his opponent be for his next fight? But I hope to see you guys in the next video. We're going to boost up these career retrospectives from here on out. I love making this content and opening your eyes to where these guys come from. But again, that'll do it for today. Peace out.